Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. This episode is brought to you by The Wellness Paradigm, a holistic health coaching company shifting the way that women understand and heal their bodies. Through bioenergetic testing, functional lab testing, and functional nutrition, we uncover what traditional approaches often overlook, so you can stop guessing, start healing, and finally feel like yourself again. No more one-size-fits-all protocols, just real answers, deep-rooted healing, and a clarity and confidence you deserve to feel incredible. It's time to shift the paradigm of women's health. Now, on to our show. And hello, good morning to you, good afternoon for me, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for coming on the show. I feel like this will be a really interesting conversation. We were kind of chatting a little bit before, and she's going to talk about resonance and energy in a very different and unique way than we've had other people chat in the past. But she's the founder of the Quantum Reconciliation Project, where she blends quantum physics, indigenous wisdom, and trauma-informed coaching to help guide clients through deep inner transformation. But I think what's really interesting that we'll get into too is there's a lot of really deep-rooted concepts like, resonance in and of itself, quantum physics, pattern and awareness. And I think you bring it in a way that people can understand and use it every day, which is really, really important. And, maybe even I'll get something out of this too, because being in bioresonance work, it's a little difficult sometimes for me to understand what resonance really is, even though all of this is rooted in science, it's rooted in quantum physics, but it still feels in the ether for a lot of people. So let's dive into it. And first of all, let us know who you are and how you got into this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you touched on it quite well, but I overall am a systems thinker and a cultural facilitator. I'm an intuitive researcher that's really trying to focus on the intersection of consciousness and human systems and culture and understand what makes us who we are, what makes us tick the way that we do. And I believe that the answer to holistic health and to healing, what ails us as a society and individually, has to be rooted in the answers that even science still doesn't have. And so my focus is to really look at whether it's that the science isn't right, but whether it's that our frame and our metaphors are wrong. And so a lot of what I want to talk about today is what that reframe is. I got into this work just a lot of it has to do with my own background. I grew up in a very rigid religious context, and I'm not an anti-faith person. So I think that the answers to what will bring true healing have to be at the intersection of spirituality and science, because everything is spirit, everything is frequency, and that is connected to how matter and mass can exist. So I don't think that spirituality and science are separate. I think the answers are at the intersection. And so my desire to understand that required breaking out of that context. And that's really hard, especially if you come from a context where, they practice shunning, or you become an outsider if you go that route. And so I know what it's like to have to burn everything down to the ground and start over to find out who you really are and what your most authentic and coherent self can be. And that's really what started this journey. And so in my desire to understand what the bridge or the connection between spirit and science is, it led me down this path of studying quantum physics, and how that might be the root of why we design systems the way they do, what we're missing, and what some of those connections are.
Yeah, I feel like each one of these things we could talk about for probably an
Yes.
hour. Um, but tell us a little bit about, actually, I kind of want to ask this question on,
Yeah.
before we dive into the concepts, like one or two high level transformations you facilitated and what those have kind
Yeah.
of looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, a lot of my work is focused on people who are recovering from religious trauma. Um, I strongly believe that because all trauma happens in relationships, they can only be healed in relationships. And I think we lose that. We put the burden of healing on people, when really all trauma happens within systems. And so I work with people to help them understand not just where they might feel broken and how they can heal that, but how that fits into the larger context of the system. So I have somebody that I'm working with right now who, is talking about how they have felt broken for a really long time, and they've made a lot of progress, but still there's a lot of these like deep rooted paradigms that they're not even always aware of. And so working with them on understanding self sabotage and how that's not necessarily even something we choose, but that's rooted in the brain survival patterns and how the brain, focuses more on what is familiar, even if it's toxic. Your brain doesn't, your amygdala doesn't care what your soul wants. It just wants what's familiar, even if that is toxic to you. And so I've seen a lot of progress with this person specifically starting to realize that like they're healing and they're overcoming a lot of the things that they need to focus on isn't just personal, but it's looking at how the system, is reinforcing some of these self-sabotage loops. Another person that I'm working with, I feel, has really transformed and blossomed over the last few weeks. Also kind of in that same place of feeling like an outsider, neurodivergent, or I prefer the term neuroexpansive person who just feels like I see that the world is broken, but if it's not me, then like, why does everybody reject me when I'm just trying to build something better? And I really believe that we're on the edge of an evolutionary wave in terms of brain development and consciousness, and that people are really starting to see how it's not that they are broken, but that they are inside of systems that just functionally do not prioritize human wellness, and they're not human-centered systems. And so I've been working with that person to teach them systems thinking and understand what systems thinking looks like and how the system reinforces patterns that make them feel broken. And it's been very transformative to watch them, to see them kind of unravel a lot of these constructs and illusions and realize that like most of the things we build society on aren't real. Money's not real. The stock market's not real. Like those are just things we've constructed to make society function. And when people are educated about that and realize that there truly are ways we could build society that don't make people feel broken and that are more human centered, they start to feel whole and see that it's not that there's something wrong with them. It's just that they see through most of the artificial things we built in society that make people suffer. And so I think those are a couple of the transformations that I've seen that really stand out lately with a few of the people that I'm working with.
Yeah, interesting. I know it's always hard to pick like one or two sometimes.
Yeah.
But what really kind of got you into wanting to dive more specifically into resonance, and what does that mean? To somebody that's listening who maybe doesn't understand what consciousness even means, what resonance
Yes.
really means. Like how would you maybe describe that, and how do you find that it plays a factor into, this whole journey?
Yeah. It was kind of funny. What set me down this path, and I think what also helped me wake up in terms of questioning the fundamentalism I was born into, was I saw the movie Interstellar. And that is to this day my favorite movie because the movie is so rich in accurate science, and yet at the same time, like I cry every time I watch it, even though I've seen it a million times, because the movie points to the fact that like we haven't solved the answer to what gravity is, because it has to be something more than just like math. And so that set me down the path of reading about quantum physics and like thinking a lot about what gravity is. And I had a lot of time to do that as I was extricating myself, from this very rigid context. And, there were times where I was alone and felt like, what's helping me hold it all together? And I thought, what is gravity? And I think that the reason that science hasn't figured it out is due to a couple main things. Everything in the universe is either wave or particle or both, according to quantum physics. But somehow science thinks that gravity is neither of those. That doesn't make any sense to me. And so if we know that everything in the universe is either particle or wave or both, then is gravity not just a frequency, a very specific bandwidth of frequency? And so that's the theory that I'm working from right now. And not just a frequency, but a standing wave. So for people who might, be less into nerding out on quantum physics, on their Saturday morning coffee break, a standing wave, like put most simply, is, basically a wave that recurses on itself. So it's the same frequency moving in opposite directions that becomes a standing wave. And that's how matter can form, right? It's basically a frequency body that can collect and become something that holds together and stands. And so I thought, what if gravity is just a specific frequency that is a standing wave? And that's like the memory layer of the quantum field. It's like the save as function or layer of the quantum field. So that when a person or a particular state of matter is coherent enough or harmonious enough to hold form, that it locks onto gravity and gravity holds it there. And I said, that makes more sense, because it never made sense to me, the idea that space is a vacuum, because things can't stay suspended in a vacuum, right? But if space is gravity and it's a standing wave, then it makes sense to me that gravity is holding things in place, not holding them down, but holding them up, because it's a standing wave, meaning that there are waves that recur above and below that thing. And so basically that would mean gravity is like a quantizer or a tuning fork for matter, holding it in place and keeping it locked into its most harmonious, coherent resonance. That's a theory I've been working from since I saw Interstellar, started reading about quantum physics, and basically, the theories that the greats have come up with, but where some of the gaps are, and this is where I've landed.
What sort of, when you talk about resonance, how do you, I don't want to say quantify, but how, for me, resonance, I'm like quotation quantifying with
Mm-hmm.
bioresonance testing, right? On
Yes.
a screen, and I can pull up certain things that are coming up, right? When you work with people, how are you seeing not only the shifts in resonance, but also this kind of indigenous wisdom? Like, how do you shape them together to kind of play a role in people's journey?
Yeah, well, a lot of working with my clients initially starts with education, because they're usually coming to me with their cups so full of what the current institutions consider to be fact that there isn't room for adding concepts that might be different, new, or even contradictory. And a lot of where we're stuck, I'm a high context AUDHD communicator, so this will come together. But a lot of where science is stuck right now is that they want the entry ticket to discussion is bringing proof, right? It's like, well, you have this theory, where's the math? But math is an emergent property of the universe. Like, math is a result of stable awareness, right? So like Einstein didn't come up with the theory of relativity by starting with math. It's not like he was doing math and then he was like, I think I see something here. He imagined himself riding a beam of light. And then it took him 10 years to come up with the math to justify the theory. And so to me, that points, people are like, how did Einstein do all the things he did? Because Einstein relied on intuition and imagination and used that as his foundation for investigating science. And that is what indigenous wisdom has always done. Indigenous wisdom has always been focused on energy and intuition and interconnectedness, and always prioritized that as the original form of intelligence, because it is. But now we have it backwards, where everything is math first and empiricism. And because of that, we have lost the ability to really investigate deeper and find answers, because we're requiring people to bring proof before we will consider their theory. But theories aren't supposed to bring proof. They're supposed to be a foundation for investigation and testing. And so that's what I love the work that you're doing, because you're saying I have this intuition that we are energy bodies and that we're not balancing that, we're not focusing on that, and then doing the work to investigate it and to heal people. You have to do that so that you can build a body of empiricism. And we're not science, the current institutions aren't willing to do that. And so I start with my clients by educating them about that and helping them understand that the original wisdom that indigenous cultures have always relied upon is not contradictory to science. It's the foundation of it.
Yeah, that's really true, because it is very difficult for the human brain to be like, I need proof, right?
Yes.
I know, even stepping into bioresonance work, it is nice because it's almost merges where it's like, hey, I can see quotation, the proof that this is like certain things are coming up, but it's still kind of out there for a lot of people. But I think true healing is sometimes letting go of that, like needing to know all of the data, needing to know all of the
Hmm.
things, and, almost releasing this control that we need to know all of it, right? Which is hard,
Yeah.
especially for me when I like, but that's where I truly believe like we can unlock a lot more inner
Hmm.
wisdom, and true healing when we kind of release that a little bit, and understand there are things that we might not understand that still work. That's
Yes.
what I tell so many people when they get into this work.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get it. I'm like, and you don't have to. You don't have to get all of
Right.
it, right? Because sometimes it just works even when we don't always fully understand it. But you do have to believe there's a concept of needing to believe that things will work too, because energetically you can block off things if you're like, well, this is stupid, this isn't gonna work. You know what I mean? I'm
Yeah.
sure you've seen that too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like because people want it to fit within the framework that's familiar, and that's a survival reaction. The amygdala in the brain, specifically wants familiarity, and that's why self-sabotage is such a big thing. Our higher self, our soul, wants things for ourselves, but then we're constantly at a battle with ourselves. Like, I know I want to do this, I want to leave this job, I want to pursue this. Why can't I? And it's like because the tiny piece of 300 million-year-old T-Rex fear program brain, the amygdala is like, I don't care what your soul wants. Like, I just want to survive and stay safe, and this is what I know, and safety feels, familiarity feels more like safety than pursuing your highest purpose. And so when people start pursuing kind of these more or these types of treatments that are a little bit further outside of the current paradigm, that's a fear reaction, right? Like, tell me how it fits within the current framework. Like, well, we're saying that it works precisely because it doesn't fit within the current framework of established healthcare. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting perspective. Um, because I mean, obviously, I love that you keep using the word paradigm. Um,
Yeah.
um, but it's true. It's like when like so many people that come to you, come to me, it's like they're coming to us for a reason because what they've been doing
Mm-hmm.
has not been working. You know what
Correct.
I mean? And
Exactly.
they're ready to dive deeper into some other things. And then it's hard because sometimes it's like you're met with resistance, totally get it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but let's take a step back. If we keep doing all the things that you've been doing that haven't been working, we're going to stay in the same place we've been doing,
Exactly.
been in. So I think I love that you mentioned like education, starting with that. Same thing, that I do as well, because otherwise it just grounds people a little bit more to be like, okay,
Yes.
this makes sense. This isn't, woo woo is a big term, right? And it's like, nope, this is actually at like the literal root of who we are.
Yes.
And it doesn't
Exactly.
matter.
I know. I mean, I think I was talking to somebody else about that the other day, and they're all like, "Aura Shmora, like that's a bunch of metaphysical woo." And I'm like, okay, but people also thought like the Schumann resonance was woo, and the Earth obviously has an aura, right? And so that's also where my idea of like gravity being a tuning fork comes from. Like, what if aura is like the frequency gradient between gravity locking the mass in and then the mass resonating within its own natural frequency. Like, I think that gravity is the thing that holds mass at its most harmonic resonance, and that aura is the gradient between gravity as a frequency and then the person's natural resonance. And so, like, we know that the earth has aura, so why wouldn't humans have that same energy gradient that holds them in place? But it's like it's woo because the math doesn't exist yet, and the math doesn't exist because we keep calling it woo.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Now, something we talked about a little bit before we got on, it was just this practice of Koha, right? Am I
Mm-hmm.
saying right?
Yes. Yes.
And kind of this different sort of business structure. But I'm curious because this is really interesting. This is interesting to me in terms of frequency and,
Yeah.
um, yeah, talk to us a little bit about kind of what you really do in that aspect.
Yeah. Thank you for asking about that. I think that if we want to build a society in which people can really heal, then we have to structure society differently. And one of the hardest things about doing work like this, whether you're in like different types of wellness that are outside of the current institutional framework, like what we're doing, or you're offering different types of like services to help people. The difficulty is we're all kind of stuck in this system where we all have to make money to survive. And so like even though I want to just give my services away for free, I just want to help people, I still have to eat. And so it's like I'm trying to figure out how do I help people with this knowledge and still survive. So this kind of the way I structure this business, it's not the only thing that I do because I view this as a transition out of the current system in which we, live to work instead of work to live. I have a friend from New Zealand, and she's the one that educated me about Koha. But it really, again, goes back to indigenous wisdom and practices, and it's the idea that if somebody gives you a service or provides a service, then you exchange a gift, and so that doesn't have to be money. Money is not a real thing, right? We use money to buy things, to exchange things, but we could just exchange those things. We don't need to exchange paper in order to exchange things. And so it goes back to like the indigenous practices of New Zealand and like Native America, where people would exchange goods, they would exchange stories, they would exchange knowledge with one another instead of using some type of currency as a stand-in for what has value. And so I really want to offer my services and my practice in that way. There are lots of people that are struggling to get mental health help in the United States. We not only because the healthcare system is structured in a way that it's not affordable, but then there's a lot of gatekeeping around who can practice psychological wellness, and it's difficult. We've made it hard for people to get licensed, and yet again, going back to indigenous wisdom, there were people in the community that were just known as healers because they had those gifts in terms of their wisdom and their energy. And so I help people on a Koha basis, which means I don't turn anybody away if they don't have money to pay for services. There are other ways to support one another. I will ask clients to share my website or share my work or share a blog with somebody who they know needs it. And or if there's something else they think that they can do, if like they're good at graphic design and they want to help me with something. So I focus on exchanging gifts and services, and if they don't have anything, that's okay too, because reciprocity eventually comes around. But it's really a system of energetic reciprocity rather than worrying about exchanging money.
That's so interesting. If people wanted to get into this kind of work, maybe I'm gonna say maybe they're at a turning point where they want some
Mhm.
other, theories, other ways of healing, other ways of being. Like, what would you give them as an advice if they're just kind of getting started?
Yeah, I would say that I would ask them, to evaluate where they feel like they're currently held back. Usually, we know something doesn't feel right, but we don't always stop to think about what the root of that is. And we usually blame ourselves. And so I usually like to ask people more facilitator types of questions and say that, like if money was no object, right? This is a question I usually start with most people. If money was no object, like forget all the institutional barriers that exist, but if you had all the money in the world that you needed, what would you be doing with yourself right now? Today? What would you do today? What would you do next month? What would you do a year from now? And that's where I usually start with people, because most people actually know who they are and what they want if they're not bogged down with all of the systemic barriers and constructs that keep them from being who they are. And so then that becomes the anchor. And so I would ask people to start there. Like, if money was no object and you weren't restricted by system limitations, what would you be doing with yourself? Because that higher self and that purpose to me is like the signature of what your resonance is. And then we anchor to that. That doesn't mean that we know what the path is to get you there today, because it's not just a personal thing. It's about navigating systems that keep you from getting there. But if we know what that anchor is, then we know what your highest self looks like when you are in your most coherent resonant state.
Yeah, I like that.
Mhm.
If people wanted to learn more about what you do, kind of the services you offer, just get to know you a little bit more, where can people find you?
They can find me at my website, quantumreconciliation.com, and my email address is on there. They're welcome to reach out. My phone number is also on there as well. As I'm pretty open and informal in communicating with people, because I think, the human family is a community, and we just need to show up with one another that way. So people are welcome to reach out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for spending the morning slash afternoon with me and chatting. I would love if those listening, if you had a little takeaway, would love for you to share it with Elizabeth or me. Um, and other than that, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time, Elizabeth, and we'll catch you guys on the next show.
Thank you so much for having me.